The road stretched endlessly before us, a thin ribbon of cracked asphalt winding through the desolate countryside. My friends and I sat in uneasy silence, the only sound the hum of the engine and the faint rattle of loose objects in the trunk. According to the GPS, we were just 15 minutes away from the nearest town, but the surroundings had begun to change in a way that made my stomach twist. The trees on either side of the road were no longer the healthy green we had driven past earlier. Their trunks were blackened, as though fire had licked them bare, yet there was no ash, no smoke, no sign of recent burning. Their branches clawed at the sky like skeletal hands. Shadows seemed unnaturally deep, swallowing the fading sunlight. "Are we sure this is the right way?" asked Emma, her voice trembling slightly from the back seat. "GPS says so," I replied, tapping the glowing screen of my phone. But even as I said it, I noticed how the little blue arrow flickered, almost hesitant, as if the device itself wasn't certain where we were. We hadn't passed another car in over an hour. The deeper we went, the heavier the air felt, pressing down on us like an invisible weight. A strange smell, something metallic like rust or dry blood, seeped through the air vents. "Maybe we should turn around," David suggested. His fingers drummed nervously against the steering wheel. But when I glanced out the rear window, my blood ran cold. The road behind us was gone, swallowed by a curtain of mist so thick it looked solid. We can't," I whispered, my throat dry. No one spoke after that. We just kept driving deeper into the unknown as the black trees loomed higher and the sun bled out across the horizon. The mist thinned just enough for us to see the outline of buildings ahead. Relief flickered in my chest, but it was quickly smothered when I read the faded wooden sign by the roadside. "Welcome to Ashford." The letters were chipped, the paint peeling, as though it had been standing there for decades. None of us had ever heard of Ashford before, and I had spent my entire life studying maps, planning road trips. It didn't make sense. We rolled slowly into the town. The streets were eerily empty, lined with houses that looked abandoned yet strangely maintained, windows intact, doors closed, roofs in place. Curtains hung in some of the windows, and I could swear I saw them shift, as if someone inside was watching us. "Where is everybody?" Emma whispered. Her voice echoed too loudly in the silence. David parked near what looked like the town square. A rusted fountain sat in the center, its water long dried up, leaving only a cracked basin. Surrounding were old storefronts, a bakery, a barber shop, and a cafe with dim yellow light glowing inside. "Finally, people," David muttered with forced optimism, pointing toward the cafe. We stepped out of the car. The air was colder here, heavy with a dampness that clung to our clothes. The silence pressed in, broken only by the faint creak of a sign swinging in the wind. Inside the cafe, the atmosphere was suffocating. A few patrons sat hunched at tables, their skin pale and eyes hollow, as though they hadn't seen the sun in years. None of them smiled. None of them greeted us. They just stared. An older woman approached, an employee, maybe the waitress. Her hand shook as she set down 3 mugs of coffee in front of us. She leaned close, her whisper cutting through the silence like a knife. "You need to leave before sunset." Her eyes darted toward the windows, and I realized with a chill that the light outside was already beginning to fade. The words of the waitress clung to my mind like a warning etched into stone. Leave before sunset. But when I tried to ask her what she meant, she only shook her head and retreated to the back, as if afraid of being overheard. We sat in uneasy silence, our untouched mugs steaming faintly. The other patrons didn't break their stares. Their eyes followed every movement we made. They didn't whisper among themselves, didn't sip their drinks, didn't do anything except sit and watch. "I don't like this," Emma murmured. Her hand gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles went white. One man finally rose from his seat at the far end. His movements were stiff, unnatural, as though his joints resisted him. He shuffled past our table, and for the briefest second, his lips parted. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice dry and broken. Then he was gone, disappearing into the misty street outside. David forced a nervous laugh. They're just weird locals, right? Every small town has them. But his voice cracked, betraying his attempt at bravado. I glanced at the window. The sky was dimming rapidly, the colors draining into dull shades of gray. And as the shadows lengthened, I noticed movement in the square outside. Shapes, too tall, too thin, slipped between buildings, always at the edges of vision, never fully visible. The waitress returned briefly, her face pale as wax. She leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "If your car still works, leave. Don't stay the night." We didn't need any more convincing. We paid, though she didn't take the money, and rushed out to the car. But when David turned the key in the ignition, the engine coughed once and died. He tried again. Nothing. It was then that I realized the stares from the cafe weren't just curiosity. They were pity. They knew we weren't leaving Ashford. By the time we admitted the car was truly dead, the last light had already drained from the sky. A heavy, unnatural darkness swallowed Ashford. It wasn't the kind of night you find in normal towns. This darkness felt alive, pressing against the windows, seeping into your lungs with every breath. The townspeople vanished. One moment, a few pale figures lingered in the square. The next, they were gone. Doors slammed shut, curtains snapped closed, and silence fell over everything. "Where do we go?" Emma whispered, her voice shaking. The cafe's waitress appeared at the door, beckoning us inside. Quickly, she hissed. We didn't hesitate. Inside, she guided us upstairs to a small room with one narrow bed and a single cracked window. "Stay quiet," she warned, locking the door behind us. "Do not look outside. Do not answer if anyone calls your name." Her words made no sense, but we were too shaken to argue. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the sound of Emma's anxious breathing and David pacing the floor. Then, faintly from outside, a scream. It tore through the stillness, raw and desperate, echoing through the empty streets. We froze. Then another came, farther away. Then many more, overlapping, rising into a cacophony of agony. I forced myself to the window, despite the waitress's warning. At first, I saw only the square, bathed in a pale glow from the flickering street lamps. Then the shapes emerged. Figures twisted, hunched, with elongated limbs, crawled from the tree-line at the edge of town. Their eyes glowed faintly, catching the lamplight like an animal's. They moved in jerks, heads snapping in impossible angles, bodies bending like broken marionettes. They stalked from house to house, and each time they approached, the lights inside extinguished, the screaming began, and then silence. "Close it," Emma begged, pulling me from the window. "Please don't look." But I couldn't stop hearing it. The shuffling of feet, the guttural breathing, the dragging of claws across doors. And worst of all, through the walls, I heard my own name being whispered. "Michael." I pressed my back against the wall, heart hammering. The sound of my name, so familiar, yet distorted, slid through the cracks of the old wood like smoke. Emma clamped her hands over her ears. David cursed under his breath, pacing faster, his shadow flickering in the pale candlelight. Then came a knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps on the door. We froze. "Don't answer," Emma mouthed. But David moved before I could stop him. He crept closer, placing his ear against the wood. "Hello? Who's there?" For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then a voice answered, mimicking perfectly my own. "David, it's me. Michael. Open the door." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Don't," I hissed. "That's not me." David stumbled back, his eyes wide with horror. The thing outside chuckled, a sound like broken glass grinding together, then moved on down the hall. Its footsteps echoed far longer than they should have. We huddled together in silence until the door creaked open again, not from the hall, but from the other side. A boy slipped inside, no older than 17, his face pale and drawn. He shut the door quickly, pressing a finger to his lips. "My name's Daniel," he whispered. His eyes darted toward the window, as if he expected something to burst through at any moment. "You don't understand. Ashford isn't supposed to exist. It only appears every few years, pulling in anyone foolish enough to wander close. People like you." Emma's voice cracked. What happens to them? Daniel swallowed hard. They don't leave. None of them ever leave. My chest tightened. Then what about you? You're not like the others. He hesitated, his gaze darkening. Because I wasn't born here. I was dragged in just like you. For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. Then, from somewhere outside, a shriek split the night. Louder, closer, as if the creatures had caught the scent of fresh prey. Daniel's expression hardened. They know you're here, and they won't stop until they have you. Daniel didn't wait for us to argue. He grabbed a lantern from the corner of the room, motioning us to follow. His urgency was terrifyingly convincing. We can't stay here, he whispered, already unlocking the door. They'll break in. They always do. Emma clutched my arm, trembling. David muttered something about this being insane, but still we followed. The stairwell groaned beneath our weight as we crept down, the light from Daniel's lantern casting long, jittering shadows along the cracked wallpaper. The cafe downstairs was deserted. Chairs overturned, mugs of cold coffee left behind. The front door hung ajar, swaying slightly in the wind. We stepped outside into the square. The air was thick with mist, curling low along the ground like smoke. The fountain loomed ahead, its cracked basin reflecting the lantern glow. This way, Daniel urged, leading us toward the edge of town. The streets felt endless, looping in strange ways. I swore we passed the same boarded-up bakery 3 times, though we never turned around. My skin crawled. It was as if Ashford itself was shifting, reshaping to confuse us. Daniel, I hissed. Are you sure you know where you're going? He didn't answer. His face was pale in the lantern light, jaw tight. He only moved faster. Finally, we reached the old road we'd driven in on, or what should have been the road. Instead, the pavement ended abruptly in a wall of trees, impossibly dense and stretching higher than I'd ever seen. This wasn't here before, David whispered. Daniel's hands trembled on the lantern. It's always like this. The road, it disappears when night falls. A sound rose behind us, low at first, then louder, a chorus of guttural growls and distorted whispers weaving together in the dark. Shadows writhed at the far end of the street, moving closer. Emma's grip on my arm tightened painfully. What do we do? Daniel raised the lantern. There's only one chance. The church. It's the only place they can't enter. If we make it there before. He stopped. His face went pale. From the mist ahead, something moved between the trees. Tall, thin, watching us. And then it spoke in my voice again. Michael, come home. We ran. None of us spoke. None of us dared look back. But the sound of pursuit was everywhere. The scrape of claws on stone, the wet slap of footsteps on cobblestones, the whispers threading through the mist in voices that weren't our own. Daniel led the way, lanterns swinging wildly as he sprinted down the crooked streets. The houses blurred past in the darkness, each one sealed tight, their shutters trembling as unseen hands clawed at them from outside. There, Daniel gasped, pointing. Through the fog, a steeple rose, jagged against the sky. The church was old, its wooden doors splintered but standing firm. We barreled up the steps, Daniel shoving the door open just enough for us to squeeze through before slamming it shut behind us. The air inside was heavy with incense and mildew. Candles flickered weakly along the pews, their flames bending as if in fear of the night pressing against the stained glass. Emma collapsed onto a bench, gasping for breath. David paced near the altar, muttering curses under his breath. They won't come in here, Daniel said, though his voice shook. They can't. The church keeps them out. At least it's supposed to. The last words lingered uncomfortably in the air. I moved toward the altar, noticing strange carvings etched into the wood. Symbols I didn't recognize, spirals, jagged lines, shapes that made my eyes ache if I stared too long. In the center sat an old book, its leather cover worn and cracked. What is this place really? I asked. Daniel hesitated. A refuge. For those who get pulled into Ashford. It's where we learn the truth. He glanced at the book, then at me. But the truth is worse than the monsters. Before I could press him, a sound rippled through the church. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps against the door. Emma stiffened. David froze mid-step. My throat went dry. Then came the voice, Emma's voice, soft, trembling, perfect. "Michael, please. Open the door. It's me. I'm outside." Emma's eyes widened in horror. "That's not me," she whispered. The knocking grew louder. And then, horribly, it spread, echoing on every wall, every window, as if the entire church was being surrounded. And through it all, the voices multiplied, calling our names in tones too familiar to resist. The pounding against the walls grew steadier, like a heartbeat surrounding the church. Every window rattled, every candle shivered. The voices outside swelled until it felt as though 100 versions of us were begging to be let in. Daniel grabbed the old book from the altar and slammed it shut, as though even its open pages might invite the things inside. He pulled us into a tight circle near the front pews, lowering his voice to a whisper. "You deserve to know," he said, "why Ashford exists, why it won't let us go." His hands trembled as he spoke. "This place, it isn't on any map because it isn't supposed to be. It's a fracture, a scar. Centuries ago, there was a real town here. A fire swept through, killing everyone inside. But the town didn't die. It stayed, caught between life and death. Now it hunts. It lures travelers inside, so it can feed." "Feed?" David snapped. "On what?" Daniel's gaze flicked to the doors, where the pounding had turned into scratching, as though claws were digging grooves into the wood. "On us. On who we are. It takes our faces, our voices. It wears us like masks until there's nothing left of the real person." Emma's lips quivered. "Then the people we saw in the cafe." Daniel nodded grimly. "Half gone. They weren't watching you out of curiosity. They were warning you. Some of them used to be like me, outsiders who wandered in. But the longer you stay, the less of you remains." I swallowed hard, the memory of the pale patrons burning in my mind. Their hollow stares hadn't been human. They had been empty. "So how we get out?" I asked. Daniel opened the book again, flipping to a page covered in dark, spidery writing. "There's only one way. At dawn, the road reappears. But to survive until then," he traced one of the symbols carved into the altar. "You have to resist answering. No matter what you hear, no matter who calls your name, if you answer, if you acknowledge them, it's over. They'll take you." The scratching grew louder, deeper, more frantic. Then a voice cut through it all. My mother's voice. "Michael." It called sweetly, broken with sobs. "Please, I need you." Every muscle in my body ached to run to the door, to open it, to believe she was there. But Daniel's hand clamped down on my shoulder like iron. "That's how it starts," he whispered. "They know your weakest memories." And in that moment, I realized with a chill that the monsters weren't just outside. They were inside our minds. The night inside the church dragged on like an eternity. The voices never stopped. They changed tone, pitch, and language, but always, always they were familiar. My mother, Emma's brother, David's late father. They slipped into our ears like poison, coaxing, pleading, demanding. Daniel forced us to stay near the altar. He kept the lantern burning low and drew the strange symbols around us with chalk, muttering under his breath as if reciting a prayer. Hours crawled by. Sometimes the scratching stopped, only for silence to stretch so long we began to believe they were gone, until a sudden bang against the windows made Emma scream. But at last, through the stained glass, the first faint gray light began to creep in. "Dawn. The road will be back," Daniel said hoarsely. "We have to move. Now." We rushed to the doors. The scratching ceased, as if the creatures themselves had retreated into the shadows. Outside, the air felt less suffocating, though the mist still clung to the streets. Daniel led us through the twisting alleys, retracing our steps toward where the road should be. My chest tightened with every corner we turned, afraid the streets would loop again. Then we saw it, the broken asphalt stretching out of town, cutting through the forest like a lifeline. David shouted with relief, sprinting toward the car, still sitting where we had abandoned it. Miraculously, it looked untouched. He fumbled with the keys, heart pounding, and this time, the engine roared to life. We piled in. Emma sobbed, clutching my arm, as the wheels spun against the cracked pavement. Daniel clung to the seat beside me, his knuckles white. Ashford shrank in the rearview mirror, its crooked houses and faded sign swallowed by the morning mist. For the first time, I believed we might actually escape. But then, the GPS flickered on my phone, unprompted. The blue arrow glowed, and a new route appeared on the screen. One word on it: Ashford. I stared in horror as the arrow spun, pointing us back toward the town. And then, from the back seat, Emma's voice whispered in my ear. I don't think we ever left. The road stretched before us, yet the deeper we drove, the more it felt wrong. The trees, though bathed in dawn light, looked as blackened as before. The air still carried that metallic tang. David pressed the gas harder, the speedometer climbing. "Don't look back," he muttered. "We're out. We're out." But no matter how fast we drove, the scenery didn't change. The same crooked trees, the same cracked asphalt, the same mist curling low to the ground. Emma's fingernails dug into my arm. "Michael, look." Up ahead, a sign emerged through the fog. Weathered, splintered, all too familiar. "Welcome to Ashford." "No," David growled, slamming the brakes. The car screeched to a stop, but the sign remained, swaying gently as though mocking us. Daniel's face went pale. He whispered something under his breath, a prayer or a curse. I couldn't tell. "I told you, no one leaves." "Not really." The GPS flickered again. The arrow spun in circles, then froze. My phone screen went black for a moment before lighting up with words I hadn't typed. "You belong here." The engine died. The car shuddered to silence. Outside, the mist thickened, pressing against the windows like a living thing. Figures began to take shape within it, tall, thin, their movements jerky and unnatural. They crept closer, surrounding the car, their glowing eyes fixed on us. Emma sobbed quietly. David slammed the wheel, screaming curses. Daniel just stared, empty, as though he had seen this ending too many times before. I grabbed my phone, typing desperately into the Notes app, hoping anyone, would read it. If you find this, if you're reading my words, know this. There are places that don't exist on any map. If your GPS ever leads you to Ashford, don't go. Turn back. Please. The mist pressed tighter. The windows began to rattle. A hand, too long, too thin, dragged across the glass, leaving a streak of black behind. I don't know if we'll survive. I don't know if this message will ever reach the outside world. But if it does, remember one thing. Ashford is waiting, and it wants you too.